I have to admit, I was pretty excited to get my hands on The Legend of Legacy. It just looked like a well put together JRPG with phenomenal visuals. Plus, you could play as a frog. Nuff said. The pedigree of seasoned developers who came together to work on this game just seemed like a recipe for success. This includes the writer of Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, the game designer from 999, the composer from Final Fantasy XIII, and more. They all worked their magic in conjunction with the game's developer, Furyu, to create a spiritual successor to the Saga series, which was a franchise I was unaware of up until making this review. After skimming through the details of Saga, you can definitely see how The Legend of Legacy is taking many nuggets from it, including its non-linear gameplay and branching stories. The Legend of Legacy is set in the fantastical world of Avalon, which is a holy land that recently appeared out of nowhere 10 years prior to the events of the game. As commissioned by the King of Initium, which is a town in Avalon, you set out to explore the land to see what mysteries it's hiding. At the start of your adventure, you have to choose one of 7 characters to be your main protagonist. Each of these explorers have different plot lines and motivations, so you have the choice of 7 different points of views and endings. Of course, you are going to choose Filmia the Frog Prince, because let's be honest here, he's got swag. The story is probably one of the biggest problems with The Legend of Legacy though. It's paper thin and confusing, which is not something you want to hear when it comes to an RPG. Players want an epic and engrossing plot with dynamic and intriguing characters, but Legacy just doesn't provide that. The player is given a vague main goal at the outset, and besides that, it is basically up to you to explore Avalon and figure out where to go next. The story is told through these rocks that you'll encounter along your journey that will provide you with a few lines of information about the history of Avalon. Unfortunately, since the game is non-linear, you can do things out of order, and that means you'll get the history details out of order, making it utterly confusing. It would have helped a ton if the messages from the rocks were saved in your inventory in chronological order for easy reference and understanding. That doesn't happen though, and the only way to get those story details again is to go back to each and every individual rock scattered throughout Avalon and talk to them, which is just flat out tedious. Plus, it doesn't help that your party of 3 are, for the most part, boring. The game centers around the main character you chose at the beginning, so the other members you recruit are kinda just there. They rarely say anything at all, and are mainly there to help out in battle. That's pretty much it. The main protagonist you choose at the outset is not much better though. At least in my experience playing with Filmia, they have very short personal side stories and nearly zero character development. You come to not really care about them after the many hours you put into the game, and only see them as tools for battle. Thankfully, the actual gameplay and combat are a lot better than the story. For the most part, it plays out like a traditional JRPG with turn-based battles, but the developer does add a few more layers to make it a bit more complex. At the start of each turn, you have to choose a formation for your team, where they can each be in one of 3 stances: support, guard, and attack. Each stance comes with their own perks, such as the guard position, which raises defense and causes defensive arts and counters to apply to the whole party. The formation you choose for each turn could ultimately affect the outcome of the battle. Tacked onto that, you've got the charms, which are essentially your magic spells. By using items called singing shards, you can form contracts or bonds with 3 different elemental types during battle: water, air, and fire. While contracted to any given element, you can then use magical attacks or defensive moves that correspond to the element type you are bonded with. This is a huge part of the combat, because the buffs you receive from the contracts will be what keeps you alive. The thing is though, your opponent can also make elemental contracts, thus taking the buffs away from you and applying it to them. So it can sometimes end up turning into a game of tug-of-war as you fight for supremacy. The game does not do a good job explaining the whole system surrounding the elemental contracts and what in the world they are for, so for a chunk of time I was bewildered by the whole thing. A more elaborate tutorial to explain this mechanic would have been really helpful, because it's not fun playing in the dark having no clue what you are doing. Once you do get it all squared away though, it definitely keeps you on your toes more as you have a greater list of mechanics to worry about. The leveling system in The Legend of Legacy is also quite different from your standard RPG. Rather than increasing your overall character's level, characters will level up their individual stats and skills instead. This means that using a character in battle will increase their health and magic, while using a specific attack will increase the level of that move to make it stronger. It's quite an interesting change of pace, that while being a bit confusing at first, works to mix things up from the usual RPG standards. One thing I do not like is that whenever you learn a new attack during battle, your character will automatically switch out the move you were going to use and use the new one. This can be super frustrating and annoying, because this can really mess up your flow and even end in your your demise. Why they decided to implement it like that, I have no idea, but it's downright aggravating, especially during those boss fights. Oh baby, is it great. The Legend of Legacy is also not a game where you're just going to be mashing the A button during battles, because it's in no way easy. Just the regular enemy encounters alone will give you a run for your money, so you have to play strategically. Seeing the dreadful game over screen is extremely easy to come by if you are not being careful. Thankfully, there are no random encounters, so if you want, you can just run past enemies on the map to get to destinations quicker, which is something I always appreciate in an RPG. And since we're on the topic of combat, the Legend of Legacy has really bad latency issues during battle. Many times I found the frame rate stuttering because of too many enemies appearing on screen at once, or an attack being too graphically intensive. Loading times and everything else about the game is buttery smooth, but once you go into battle mode, good gravy, the frame rate is all over the place. Sometimes it would even freeze for a split second before catching back up. And oh boy, don't even get me started on the final boss fight. In terms of the Legend of Legacy's presentation, outside of the frame rate issues, it is pretty solid. At quick glance, you would think that you were playing Bravely Default, as the developer for you decided to adopt that awesome visual style. I can't complain either, as it does indeed look great, whether that be the superb chibi-style character models or hand-drawn environments. While the enemy models and animations do look great, I do have to say that there is quite a bit of reskinning present here. Because of that, it felt like there weren't that many unique enemies to encounter in the game. After seeing 4 different skins of the same bat creature, it can start to feel stale, so it would have been fantastic if there was more diversity in the creature department. As for the soundtrack, it's all around stellar. Composer Masashi Hamazu of Final Fantasy XIII created a wonderful arrangement of music that has a fantastical vibe fitting for a game such as this. It shies away from the heavy rock spectrum that you tend to see in RPGs recently, and focuses more on calming ambiences with flutes, pianos, violins, drums, and synthesizers. That's not to say that it doesn't pick up the pace though, as it certainly will when the time calls for it, but just don't expect shredding guitar solos. The game does have a magnificent battle theme though, which will certainly help keep you engaged while in the heat of combat. Now, The Legend of Legacy encourages you to play through the game 7 times so that you can see all the different plot lines for all the characters, but that just seems like a big waste of time. Playing through the game with one paper-thin character is enough in my book. Their personal side stories are very short with little character development, so I found there to be virtually no motivation to go back and see what the other characters' stories have in store. So in the end, The Legend of Legacy definitely doesn't live up to its pedigree of veteran game developers who had a part in molding it. The game's story feels like it was put on the back burner, and it's ultimately confusing. The characters are not exciting in the least, and the game suffers from frame rate issues during battle. Thankfully, the game isn't all bad, as the actual combat system is complex and entertaining. The visuals look fantastic outside of the reskinned enemies, and the soundtrack is wonderful. There are definitely some great RPGs out there to experience, but unfortunately, The Legend of Legacy is not at the top of the list. It's not exactly a game you should just flat out skip, but I think it's best if you wait for a price drop before traveling into the mysterious world of Avalon. So with that in mind guys, I found The Legend of Legacy to be a so-so game, and that will bring us to the end of this review. If you liked what you saw, please give this video a thumbs up, add it to your favorites, and all that good stuff. But I will talk to you all later in the next video guys. Bye!